Hello everyone, this is Dr. Sunita Bulla. In this session, we are going to discuss about how to containerize Java full stack application. This is a material folder I am going to share with you. To containerize full stack application, first of all, we completed front end containerization, second one back end containerization. So this is a full stack application folder. In this full stack application folder, I placed front end folder and back end folder. We have a front end and back end. We are whatever we already used in a previous sessions. So here nothing is there to learn. Everything we learned already. So now we all are familiar about Docker file, Docker compose, how to write a Docker file, how to write a Docker compose file. In this session, we are going to learn how to uh, place the Docker compose file, where to place Docker compose file, where to place the Docker file. So first of all, this is a full stack application. The full stack application contains a front end and back end folder, both folder. Now, so open this full stack app using VS Code. This is a full stack app. So see here, this is a full stack application. I imported to VS Code. So first of all is a front end code. So the front end code contains Docker file. So this Docker file we already know same Docker file we are using whatever we use to containerize React application. The same Docker file we are using. Docker file with a server config file. Docker file with a server config file. So same front end project. I didn't changed any single line. So this is the front end application, and in the back end application. So here in the back end application, same project. I didn't touch anything. So back end project with the volume. Now here this back end project contains Docker file and Docker compose. Now first of all, see here we are going to containerize full stack application. So now to containerize full stack application, we need Docker compose file. So first of all, where to place this Docker compose file? So now this Docker compose file we use it to containerize a backend project. First of all, open commands here. Dockerize full stack application. So first of all, here there are three technologies. One is React. This React is used to implement front end. Second one, Springboot. It is used to implement backend. Third one, MySQL. This is for database. So if you want to containerize Java full stack application, here we need three containers. One is one container for front end, one container for back end, one container for database. So here container 1, container 2 and container 3. We need 3 containers for to Dockerize full stack application. So now here target is these 3 containers has to start same time and they have to communicate each other. Okay, first of all, what we have to do in the React application, we need to uh, we need to create a Docker. We need to create a Docker file. First of all, let me explain workflow. So now front end application. All right, this front end application having the Docker file. This Docker file is used to create a Docker image for front end, and at the same time, if we run the Docker image, it will create the container. Okay. Now here Springboot Docker file plus nginx config. Docker file plus nginx config. Alright. So these are the files we are using in the front end. And when coming to the back end, here we used the same Docker file for converting backend project as an image. At the same time, so here we used one more file. File name is Docker Compose. This Docker Compose file is used to create a front and back end. Back end and database containers. Now here, so for creating database container, here we are not using this Docker Compose file. So instead of combining Docker Compose file with the backend, so we are going to create the Docker Compose file out of the backend. Now project structure is front end, back end and Docker Compose file. Front end having Docker its own Docker file and nginx config. Back end having its own Docker file. So now here if you want to start these two containers along with the database, we need one supporter. That supporter is called docker compose.yaml file. So now this docker compose.yaml file discuss about database container database. So now it calls the front end docker file. It calls the backend docker file. Now here whatever docker compose.yaml file. So now the docker compose.yaml file we are going to place. We are going to use these three these three docker images at the same time containers. Now let's open our project. This is our e-commerce full stack application. Now front end folder, as per the discussions, it having docker file. We already know about this. And second one, e-commerce backend. In the e-commerce backend, I am deleting docker YAML file. So now let me delete. So delete it. Now see here, the e-commerce backend would contain only one file. File name is docker file. Now see here, the docker file discussing about build stage and run stage or production stage. Now whatever this backend application going to build with the Maven and going to deploy on Eclipse server, right? By using the this one, we are going to run the jar file. Okay, now this is a Docker file. Finally, in the project structure, we are placing Docker Compose file up, out of the front end and back end. Now in this location, we are going to create one Docker Compose file. So let me explain this Docker Compose file. Now first of all, this Docker Compose file discussing about um, three things. One is service, second one is backend, third one is front end. Okay, the service we already know it having database, it calling predefined MySQL image. So predefined MySQL image from the Docker, it calling the image and it going to create a email. It going to store this image in our Docker desktop and running on the container. Container name is e-commerce DB. Username and password like a root. Every MySQL having by default username is root. That root's password is root. Database e-commerce, and at the same time, so this is about database. First one, this is the details about to create an image and container for database. Second one, backend. Okay, now here backend, in the backend it's going to create one Docker image. Docker image name is doc, Docker e-commerce backend, and it's running the Docker e-commerce backend running on the container. Container name is e-commerce backend, and the backend application having its own database and database details. Then finally, front end. The front end image name is Docker e-commerce front end, and container name is e-commerce front end, and running on the port number 3000 exposed on the 8. So it has a volume name is MySQL data. Okay, so now this is the Docker Compose file. Now first let me run this file. Take a new terminal, command prompt. All of you observe here, my cursor is, so now the command prompt redirected to the Fullstack app, not inside the backend. I'm not inside the front end. So I'm going to run the Docker Compose file only. I'm going to run Docker Compose file only. I'm not touching any front end, and I'm not touching any back end. So front end having Docker file, back end having Docker file. When you call the Docker Compose automatically calls the front end Docker file, calls the back end Docker file, and along with the MySQL DB MySQL DB image, and at the same time container. Okay, now first of all observe my command prompt location is Fullstack application. I am going to run this Docker Compose. We already know command. So what is the command to run this Docker Compose? Command is Docker Compose app. Here I am going to build. So now we have a volume. So that is the reason I am going to build with this command, Docker Compose app hyphen d hyphen build. So now only single command. So before going to execute this command, first of all use the Docker desktop. Open Docker desktop. So now with the same name, any images are there. First of all check with the same name, any images are there. So first delete those images, then after execute your commands. We have already previous session we have already executed front end and back end. First delete those, then do it. After that we will execute. So now see here, go to the images. I have a image name is e-commerce friended, right? Let me delete this image. I'm going to delete all the images related to e-commerce frontend. So now these image containers are running. I mean already in live mode. First delete the container, comes to the images and delete images. So before going to run this one, delete the images. Wait for 2 minutes for internet. Meanwhile, so now first of all, so what is this is the first command we need to type. So if you want to run the Docker compose, this is the first command we need to use. Right. Now copy this command, paste here. When I executed this command, what is going on? So the Docker compose create 3 images. First image name is Docker e-commerce frontend. Second image is Docker e-commerce backend. Third image is MySQL. And at the same time, those are running on the containers. The container name is e-commerce frontend and e-commerce backend and DB. Now, first of all, execute this command. So now, see here, it's going to create 3 images and containers. While doing this experiment, all of you take care about your internet connection. Now, first of all, database image and container downloading from the Docker marketplace. So simply we are calling Docker MySQL image to our local system. So this image is going to create. So the DB database is a Docker predefined MySQL image. That image is we are injecting to our local Docker desktop. database created, backend created, now front end created. Super. Now backend created, front end created, network created, volume created, container started, e-commerce DB container, and e-commerce backend container started, and e-commerce front end container started. So now everything started. So waiting for e-commerce DB. Check here. Now images. MySQL image, e-commerce full stack app backend, e-commerce full stack app frontend, and these are the images. These images are running on the containers. One container only start we can visible, front end only we can see the container. Now this is the front end container. We need to wait for up to completion of MySQL DB. For this experiment only one command. That command is Docker compose up. So Docker compose up. This is only one command. By using the single command, we are going to Dockerize our full stack application. If you want to check database logs, this is the command. If you want to check the logs of the backend, how it is created, how it is going on. So now if you want to check the logs and if you want to see the errors, anything is there, then go type this command. So these are the log information related to the backend and database. Now perfect. So everything is created. Backend, frontend, network, volume, container, three containers, three images along with the volume and network. So everything is ready. The go to the container. Now this is the container. So now there are three containers here. Full stack app. The full stack app having three containers. So now let me check container. So this is the single all the now before we are seeing three different containers, but now here three containers running on the same e-commerce container. Okay, sir. First of all, this is the compose stack. The compose stack having the compose stack having three containers. Now click on the compose stack. We can see three containers here. One is MySQL DB container, database container, front end container. Now here click on the front end, port number. So this is the e-commerce application. Now I'm going to sign up. Username is Sunita. Password is this is the email address. Email. Next password is a something. Click on sign up. So perfect. Login success. Okay. Now it's connecting to the backend. Now go to login. So now it's logged in. We didn't added any product details. Database is empty. Alright, database we are not using our local MySQL, so we are using MySQL container. Okay, database is empty. Now if you want add, you can add. Okay, if you want to add, what you have to do? Now first of all, the container name. What is the container name? MySQL DB, right? So now here container name is MySQL. Just wait. image. So now MySQL compose files. Now container name is MySQL DB. Alright, so we created container name is MySQL DB. So that is the reason if you want to check your um, MySQL container, okay, exe docker exe is a command to enter inside to the container. If you want to open the front end container, give the front end container name. If you want to open the backend container, give the backend container name. Now I am going to open your MySQL container. Okay, give the command. So okay, this is the MySQL. Let's open the MySQL. Now here show databases, use database, show tables. Three commands I am going to execute. Now show tables. There are two tables. One is the product and user. Now just now we logged in with Sunita. Let me check that the details entered into the MySQL or not. So now here select star from users. So now see here the details entered in a MySQL. If you want to see the product, you simply insert these queries. Okay, table e-commerce products it not showing. Um, there are two databases. Use e-commerce database change. Now show tables. There are two tables, products and users. Now execute these queries. Okay, four rows selected. Perfect. Okay, now it's showing details. Now go to your browser, refresh. So data available. So right, so everything is available. Click on the code. Proceed to checkout. So e-commerce website working properly. So this is the way we will Dockerize and containerize our full stack application. So now every time when you are working with the full stack application, So now inside the front end and back end, its own Docker file is there. So now if you want to run multiple Docker files at a time, we need to use compose file. First of all, we should learn where should we place this Docker compose file. So if you're working on backend project, we need to place Docker compose file inside the backend project. Now if you're working on full stack application, we need to place outside the front end and back end of your full stack application. So now this is the way we will Dockerize full stack application. Thank you.